The story of the Dwemer. Why did they disappear? Welcome back, fellow lore seekers. Today, we're venturing deep beneath the mountains of Tamriel to explore one of the most profound mysteries in all of Elder Scrolls history. Imagine walking through an ancient city carved into the living rock, steam still hissing from pipes that haven't been maintained in thousands of years. Mechanical guardians patrol halls where no living soul has walked in millennia, their gears still turning, their purpose still fulfilled despite the absence of their creators. This is what awaits anyone brave or foolish enough to enter a Dwemer ruin. And everywhere, in every city, in every workshop, in every living quarter, there is one question that echoes through the silence. Where did they go? The Dwemer, known to many as the Dwarves despite being the same height as any other elf, were the most technologically advanced civilization that Tamriel has ever known. They built cities that spiral deep into the earth, powered by geothermal energy and steam. They created mechanical servants that still function perfectly after 3,000 years. They harnessed powers that other races could barely comprehend, let alone replicate. They were masters of tonal architecture, the art of manipulating reality itself through sound and resonance. And then, in a single instant, in the year 700 of the First Era, every single Dwemer on the continent of Tamriel vanished without a trace. Not disappeared over time, not wiped out by plague or war, gone, all at once, simultaneously, men, women, children, scholars, warriors, craftsmen, from the deepest mines beneath Red Mountain to the furthest outposts in High Rock, every Dwemer simply ceased to exist in the same moment. They left behind their cities, their machines, their achievements, their very clothes and armor. In some ruins, explorers have found piles of ash next to Dwemer equipment, as if the inhabitants had simply been reduced to dust where they stood. This disappearance has haunted Tamriel for over 3,000 years. Scholars have dedicated their lives to understanding what happened. Adventurers have braved deadly ruins seeking clues. Even the most brilliant minds of the Mages Guild have found themselves stumped by this mystery. And perhaps most unsettling of all, only one Dwemer is known to have survived, and even he has no idea what happened to his people. The story of the Dwemer's disappearance is not just a tale of a race that vanished. It's a story about ambition and hubris, about reaching for godhood and the price that such reaching demands. It's about the dangers of playing with forces beyond mortal comprehension, and about mysteries that may never be fully solved. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's descend into the depths together as we uncover the story of the Dwemer, an attempt to answer the question that has puzzled Tamriel for ages. Why did they disappear? Who were the Dwemer? Before we can understand the disappearance, we need to understand who the Dwemer actually were. Their very name gives us insight into their nature and their philosophy. Dwemer, in the ancient Oldmerish language, means the deep ones or the deep counselled. Some scholars translate it as the people of the deep, which is perhaps the most literal interpretation. This name reflected both their preference for living underground and their philosophical depth, their commitment to understanding the fundamental nature of reality through reason and logic rather than faith and tradition. Physically, the Dwemer were Mer, or elves, descended from the ancient Aldmer who had once inhabited the Somerset Isles. Despite the name Dwarves given to them by the giants and later adopted by humans, the Dwemer were of average height for elves, typically ranging from 5.5 to 6 feet tall. This misconception about their size has persisted through history, causing endless confusion for those who explore their ruins and find that doorways and furniture were built for people of normal, elven stature, not the short, stocky figures that the name dwarf might suggest. The Dwemer had bronze or greyish-golden skin, quite different from the pale gold of the Altmer, or the dark ash-grey of the Dunmer. Their builds were sturdy and practical, rather than the more delicate frames associated with other elven races, reflecting their focus on engineering and manual craftsmanship alongside intellectual pursuits. Like all elves, they were long-lived, with natural lifespans that could extend beyond 300 years. And with magical enhancement, some individuals could live considerably longer. What truly set the Dwemer apart from other races wasn't their appearance or longevity, but their philosophy and culture. While every other race on Tamriel worshipped either the Aedra, the Daedra, or some combination of divine beings, the Dwemer rejected the very concept of divinity. They didn't deny that powerful entities existed, they simply refused to acknowledge them as gods worthy of worship. To the Dwemer, the beings that other races called gods were merely powerful entities that could be understood, studied, and potentially even surpassed through sufficient technological and magical advancement. This philosophical stance was revolutionary and deeply unsettling to their neighbours. The Dwemer worship nothing except reason and logic themselves, and there's scholarly debate about whether they literally deified these concepts or simply held them as supreme values. Some texts capitalize reason and logic when describing Dwemer beliefs, suggesting they may have created some form of abstract deification of rational thought. Regardless, their religion, if it can even be called that, was one of pure empiricism and skepticism. The Dwemer primarily inhabited an ancient region called Dwemereth, which encompassed much of what would later become Morrowind. Their great cities dotted the landscape both above and below ground, with vast underground complexes that extended deep into the earth. But their influence and settlements spread far beyond Morrowind's borders. Significant Dwemer populations established themselves in Skyrim, where they built holds like Markarth and complexes like Blackreach, an underground city so vast it contained its own ecosystem, complete with giant mushrooms and subterranean creatures. They also had presences in Hammerfell and High Rock, each settlement connected through their advanced understanding of both physical construction and more esoteric means. The Dwemer developed technology that allowed for instant communication across vast distances, a form of telepathy achieved through their machines that gave them access to information far more quickly than any messenger system used by other races. This technological edge, combined with their military prowess and mechanical guardians, made them a formidable power despite their relatively small population compared to human kingdoms or other elven nations. The Dwemer language diverged so significantly from Aldmeris that it became mutually unintelligible with the tongue of their cousins. This linguistic drift reflected their cultural divergence from other elven peoples. Where the Altmer looked to their past and their traditions, the Dwemer looked always forward, always seeking new understanding and new capabilities. Dwemer society and values. Understanding Dwemer society helps explain both their achievements and potentially their ultimate fate. Theirs was a civilization utterly unlike any other on Tamriel, organized around principles that other races found alien and often disturbing. In most societies across Tamriel, social hierarchies placed nobility and clergy at the apex of power. Kings ruled by divine right, priests interpreted the will of the gods, and religious institutions held tremendous influence over daily life. The Dwemer rejected this model entirely. In their city-states, which were called freeholds, power belonged to those who demonstrated the greatest intellect, the most profound understanding of tonal architecture, and the most impressive engineering achievements. The top echelons of Dwemer society were occupied by engineers, scholars, and architects, the tonal architects chief among them. Dwemer kings existed, but they didn't inherit their positions through bloodlines or claim divine mandate. Instead, a king held power through the support of the clan's architects and through his own accomplishments and political maneuvering. Any member of a Dwemer clan could theoretically become king if they possessed sufficient backing from the influential architects and could demonstrate superior capability. This meritocratic system, based on achievement rather than birth, was remarkably progressive in some ways, though it created its own forms of elitism based on intellectual and technical prowess. The tonal architects held special status within Dwemer culture. These were the masters of tonal architecture, an incredibly complex discipline that involved manipulating the fundamental tones of reality itself. Tonal architecture was based on the belief that all of existence was essentially a song, vibrations and harmonics that could be analyzed, understood, and altered through precise application of specific sounds and resonances. By mastering these techniques, tonal architects could affect matter, energy, and even more abstract concepts in ways that seemed magical to outsiders, but which the Dwemer understood as applied physics at the most fundamental level. Lord Cagranach, who would become central to the story of the Dwemer's disappearance, was the chief tonal architect and high priest of his people. His title of High Priest is somewhat ironic given the Dwemer's rejection of traditional religion, but it speaks to the quasi-religious reverence with which his people regarded the pursuit of ultimate knowledge. Cagranach was considered a pioneer in the field of mythopoeic forces, essentially the study of how belief and narrative could shape reality, and he developed tools and theories that would ultimately determine the fate of his entire race. The Dwemer approach to other races revealed both their philosophical consistency and their capacity for cruelty. They viewed themselves as the most advanced, most rational people on Nirn, the mortal plane, and they considered other races to be primitive to varying degrees. Even the Aldmer, from whom the Dwemer had descended, were dismissed as backward religious fanatics trapped in outdated thinking. This sense of superiority made it easy for the Dwemer to use other races for their own benefit with little remorse. The most damning example of Dwemer callousness was their treatment of the Snow Elves, known as the Falmer. When the Falmer sought refuge from Nordic expansion and asked the Dwemer for sanctuary, the Dwemer agreed, but at a terrible price. They forced the Snow Elves to consume toxic fungi that would allow them to survive in the deep underground environments where the Dwemer lived. These fungi gradually destroyed the farmers' eyesight, rendering them blind and dependent on their Dwemer hosts. Once the Snow Elves were vulnerable, the Dwemer enslaved them completely. The Falmer were used as labourers, test subjects, and servants, subjected to conditions that warped them over generations into the twisted, hostile creatures that would eventually become known by their original name. The War of the Crag, an uprising of the Falmer against their Dwemer oppressors, was still ongoing when the Dwemer vanished, ending the conflict by default with no clear victor, but with the Falmer left in a state of perpetual degradation. This willingness to exploit and experiment on other races extended beyond the Falmer. The Dwemer captured members of various races, including humans and beastfolk, to serve as subjects for their experiments and as slaves in their workshops and mines. Their empathy for beings they considered inferior was minimal to non-existent. This moral callousness, combined with their rejection of divine authority and their attempts to manipulate forces that other races considered sacred, would lead some to theorize that their disappearance was divine punishment for their hubris and cruelty. Yet for all their cold rationality, the Dwemer were not without culture and achievement that went beyond pure utility. Their architecture, while functional, displayed an aesthetic sense that valued geometric precision and mathematical harmony. Their cities were marvels of engineering that blended form and function, with steam pipes and geothermal systems integrated seamlessly into structures that could house thousands of inhabitants. They created art, though it tended toward the abstract and the mathematical, rather than the representational styles favoured by other races. The Dwemer also had their own literature and philosophical texts. Books like Divine Metaphysics, written in the Dwemer language, detailed Cagranach's theories about creating new gods through tonal architecture. These texts were so complex that even brilliant scholars fluent in Dwemeris struggled to fully comprehend them. The knowledge they contained was dangerous, dealing with concepts that could fundamentally alter reality itself, and it's perhaps fitting that such knowledge would ultimately be connected to their civilization's end. The technology of the deep folk. To understand the magnitude of what was lost when the Dwemer disappeared, we must examine their technological achievements. Even 3,000 years after their vanishing, no other race has managed to replicate their metallurgical processes, their mechanical innovations, or their deeper understanding of tonal architecture. The Dwemer were not just ahead of their time, they possessed knowledge that remains ahead of our time, locked away in ruins, filled with traps and guardians that still function with deadly efficiency. The most visible legacy of Dwemer technology is their animunculi, the mechanical constructs that continue to patrol and defend their ancient cities. The term animunculi refers to the artificial beings that the Dwemer created to serve as soldiers, workers, guards, and servants. These machines were not merely mechanical, they incorporated elements of enchantment and soul gems, blending technology and magic in ways that create something genuinely unique to Dwemer engineering. The smallest and most common animunculi are the Dwemer spiders. These arachnid-shaped constructs range from the size of a small dog to much larger variants, and they serve as the first line of defense in most ruins. Despite their relatively simple construction compared to larger animunculi, Dwemer spiders are remarkably sophisticated. They can emit electrical barriers to charge themselves and nearby constructs, turning their runes blue with stored energy. When destroyed, powered spiders explode violently, releasing their stored electricity in a burst that can be deadly to intruders. They're capable of interpreting intent, somehow perceiving whether a person entering a ruin means harm or is simply passing through and responding accordingly. Dwemer spheres are humanoid-sized constructs that patrol ruin interiors. In their dormant state, they appear as harmless brass balls that roll along preset paths, but when they detect a threat, they unfold into fully armed and armoured warriors with blade attachments and the ability to fire crossbow bolts or energy projectiles. The transformation happens with mechanical precision that speaks to the genius of their design. Each component serves multiple purposes, conserving space and weight while maintaining combat effectiveness. The most formidable of the common animunculi are the Dwemer centurions, also called steam centurions. These massive constructs tower over most people, ranging from twice human height to, according to some reports, several hundred times larger, though such extreme sizes are likely exaggerations or refer to specialized constructs. A centurion typically features heavy armor plating, a mechanical hammer or mace on one arm, and a spring-loaded blade on the other. Many can emit scalding blasts of steam that serve both as weapon and as a way to clear the mechanisms that drive them. Centurions are often found attached to charging gantries when not active, connected to power sources that keep them ready for deployment. Despite their size and power, they have weaknesses. The steam that drives them makes them vulnerable to frost attacks, which can freeze their mechanisms, while fire tends to strengthen them by heating the water in their systems. Their construction varies between regions, with centurions in Skyrim generally being larger and more heavily armoured than those found in Morrowind, suggesting either regional variations in design or improvements over time. Beyond these common types, the Dwemer created many specialised animunculi. Dwarven ballistas are squat, four-legged constructs equipped with powerful bolt throwers that can pierce armour at considerable distances. Dwemer scarabs, both small and large, patrol certain ruins and were likely used for specialised tasks. Sentries, also called theodolites, are spherical constructs that can emit electrical shocks and generate protective barriers for nearby machines. Some ruins contain even more exotic designs, like the dynasters, massive constructs that resemble mechanical behemoths and can deploy multiple spheres from concealed compartments. What makes these animunculi truly remarkable is that they continue to function millennia after their creators vanished. They appear to maintain themselves through mechanisms that remain poorly understood. They seem to be linked to their places of origin in mysterious ways, losing power if removed too far from Dwemer ruins. This observation suggests they're powered not just by conventional means, but by something tied to the tonal architecture woven into the very structure of Dwemer cities, though the exact nature of this connection remains a matter of scholarly debate. The animunculi can evidently produce more of themselves using automated workshops that still operate in some ruins. They repair each other when damaged. They patrol according to patterns that suggest actual intelligence rather than simple programming. When one construct is alerted to an intruder, it can somehow communicate with others nearby, coordinating responses in ways that indicate either a networked consciousness or at least a very sophisticated communication system. All of this happens without any living supervision, creating what appears to be an autonomous society of machines, maintaining itself through the ages. Though how this is possible without some form of ongoing power source or intelligence guiding them remains one of the many mysteries the Dwemer left behind. But the animunculi, impressive as they are, represent only one aspect of Dwemer technology. The metal they used, simply called Dwemer metal or dwarven metal, remains impossible to replicate. It doesn't rust, doesn't corrode, and absorbs impact in ways that make it superior to any armor material developed since. The secrets of its refinement died with the Dwemer, and modern blacksmiths can only melt down and reforge existing Dwemer scrap, unable to create new material from raw ore. The Dwemer mastered geothermal power, tapping into volcanic heat sources beneath Morrowind to power their cities. Their steam technology was incredibly advanced, using pressure systems and complex piping networks that distributed heat and power throughout vast underground complexes. They built airships, enormous vessels that could travel through the skies using principles that combined both mechanical engineering and more exotic propulsion methods. One such airship was encountered on the island of Stros Makai, still functional centuries after the Dwemer vanished, though damaged from a crash landing. Their architectural achievements extended beyond simple construction. The Dwemer built observatories like the Oculori in Msulft, a device designed to collect and transmute starlight, splitting it into components that could be projected onto a map of Tamriel to reveal locations of great magical power. The Tower of Mzark housed another Oculori, but this one was designed to safely store artifacts of immense importance, specifically an Elder Scroll, one of the artifacts of time itself that could drive mortals mad with the knowledge they contained. The Dwemer worked with Etherium, an incredibly rare luminescent blue crystal found deep underground. This material had strong magical properties, but was alchemically inert and harmonically volatile, resisting all conventional attempts to process it through ordinary means. The Dwemer managed to harness Etherium's power, creating artifacts of unique potency. The discovery of major Etherium sources led to conflicts between Dwemer city-states, wars over control of this valuable resource that contributed to the political tensions within Dwemer society. They developed sophisticated security systems that included not just mechanical traps, but also magical wards and locks that required Dwemer blood to open, genetic keys that ensured only their people could access certain areas. They created devices that could capture and analyze sounds, record information, and even manipulate memory. In Blackreach, they built entire ecosystems under the earth, with giant luminescent mushrooms and architectural structures that defied conventional understanding of space. But perhaps their most ambitious technological achievement, and the one most directly connected to their disappearance, was the Numidium. This colossal construct, also called the Brass God, Numidium, or the Brass Tower, represented the ultimate expression of Dwemer philosophy and engineering. standing over 1,000 feet tall when activated, the Numidium was designed to be nothing less than a new god, an artificial deity created through tonal architecture and powered by the Heart of Lorkhan itself. The discovery beneath Red Mountain. The story of the Dwemer's disappearance truly begins with a discovery deep beneath Red Mountain in the Heart of Morrowind. While mining in the volcanic depths, Dwemer excavators uncovered something that should not have existed in the mortal world, something whose very presence would reshape the destiny of their entire race. They found the Heart of Lorkhan. To understand the significance of this discovery, we need to understand who Lorkhan was and what his heart represented. According to the creation myths told across Tamriel, in the beginning, there existed only spirits, the Et-Ada, who dwelt in timeless realms. These spirits were divided into two groups, the Aedra, who would participate in creation, and the Daedra, who would not. Lorkhan, whose name means doom drum, was the spirit who conceived of and championed the creation of Mundus, the mortal plane. Lorkhan convinced or tricked other Aedra into giving up portions of their divine power to create Mundus, a realm where time would flow, where mortality would exist, where change and growth and death would all be possible. But this act of creation diminished the Aedra who participated, trapping parts of their essence in the mortal world. Some viewed this as a gift, the creation of something new and beautiful. Others saw it as betrayal, theft of their immortal divinity. The Aedra held Lorkhan accountable for this diminishment. They tore out his heart and tried to destroy it, but found they could not, for it was inextricably bound to the very existence of Mundus itself. So instead, they cast it down, shooting it like an arrow across Tamriel. Where it struck the earth, it created Red Mountain, a massive volcano in what would become Morrowind. There the heart remained, buried deep beneath the mountain, pulsing with divine power, the physical remnant of a dead god, and the metaphysical anchor point of mortality itself. For millennia, the heart lay undiscovered, its power seeping into the rock around it, transforming the mountain into something more than mere geology. Then the Dwemer found it. Imagine the excitement, the validation they must have felt. Here was proof that the gods were not eternal, unchangeable beings beyond mortal reach. Here was a god's heart, physical, tangible, something that could be studied and measured and understood. And more than that, here was a source of power unlike anything the mortal races had ever accessed. Lord Kagranak, the chief tonal architect, immediately recognized both the opportunity and the danger that the heart represented. He devoted himself to studying it, developing theories about how its power could be harnessed. The heart wasn't just powerful, it was generative, constantly producing divine energy. This was the battery that had powered creation itself, and it continued to function even after being torn from its owner. Kagranak developed a set of tools specifically designed to interact with the heart. These tools, known as Kagranak's tools, or simply the profane tools, were unlike anything else the Dwemer had created. Each one was crafted through tonal architecture, imbued with the power to manipulate the fundamental frequencies of reality itself. There were 3 tools, and each served a specific purpose in the process Kagranak envisioned. Wraithguard was an enchanted gauntlet, appearing as a piece of armor, made from a material comparable to brass, but infused with protections that went far beyond physical defense. Its primary purpose was to protect its wearer from the devastating energies of the heart, and to allow safe handling of the other 2 tools. Without Wraithguard, anyone attempting to wield the weapon tools would suffer catastrophic damage, essentially instant death, as their body was torn apart by forces no mortal frame could withstand. Even with Wraithguard, learning to use it was an agonizing process that involved harmonizing one's own magical signature with the artifact, a bonding that brought the user perilously close to death. Sunda was an enchanted hammer of divine mass, designed to strike the heart and produce exact volumes and qualities of power, according to precise tonal calculations. It looked like a straight-peen hammer with a brass construction, but its weight and capabilities went far beyond what such a tool should possess. Using Sunda on the heart was like playing an instrument, each strike a note in a larger composition that would shape the flow of divine energy. Keening was an enchanted blade designed to flay and focus the power rising from the heart. It appeared as a short blade, elegant and precise, but wielding it without Wraithguard would instantly kill anyone foolish enough to try. Together with Sunda, Keening allowed a tonal architect to shape the raw power of the heart into specific forms and direct it toward particular purposes. But what was the purpose Kagrenak had in mind? What did he intend to do with the power of a god's heart? The answer to that question lies in his magnum opus, a text called Divine Metaphysics. Divine Metaphysics was written in Dwemeris and detailed Kagrenak's theories on how to create a new god using the Heart of Lorkhan as a power source. The text remained largely indecipherable to anyone who lacked detailed knowledge of both the Dwemer language and their tonal architecture. Even Yagrum Bagarn, the last living Dwemer and a master craftsman in his own right, claimed to understand Kagrenak's theories but refused to explain them, believing that such knowledge should die along with its creator. What we know from various sources is that Kagrenak intended to create the Numidium, a massive mechanical god that would serve as a vessel for divine power. But more than that, he apparently intended to use the heart to achieve something called apotheosis for the Dwemer people. Apotheosis means ascension to godhood, transformation from mortal to divine. Kagrenak believed he could tap the heart's power to transcend the limitations of mortality, to elevate his entire race to a higher plane of existence. This ambition was characteristically Dwemer. They rejected the worship of existing gods, viewing such devotion as weakness and irrationality. But they didn't reject the concept of divinity itself, only the idea that divinity was beyond mortal reach. To Kagrenak and his followers, godhood was not a quality reserved for primordial spirits, but rather a state that could be achieved through sufficient understanding and application of tonal principles. They would become their own gods, proving once and for all that reason and logic could surpass faith and tradition. Not all Dwemer agreed with this approach. Some voiced concerns that tampering with the heart might pose unknown dangers and risks. The heart was, after all, the physical remnant of a god, intimately connected to the very existence of mortality itself. Who could say what consequences might follow from attempting to manipulate such power? But Kagrenak and his supporters dismissed these concerns. They had studied the heart extensively. They understood its tonal properties. They had created tools specifically designed to safely channel its power. What could possibly go wrong? The answer to that question would reshape all of Tamriel's future. The War of the First Council. The Dwemer's work on the Heart of Lorkhan did not remain secret for long. Their activities beneath Red Mountain drew attention from their neighbours, and as it turned out, from powers beyond the mortal realm entirely. To understand the context of the war that followed, we need to know about the political situation in Morrowind during the First Era. The region was home to two major elven peoples, the Dwemer in their underground cities, and the Khymer on the surface. The Khymer, whose name means changed ones, were descendants of Aldmer, who had followed the prophet Veloth away from the Somerset Isles. They were a deeply religious people, who worshipped what they called the Good Daedra, specifically Boethia, Mephala, and Azura. The relationship between the Dwemer and Khymer had historically been tense. Their religious and cultural differences were profound. The Dwemer mocked the Chymer's worship of the Daedra as primitive superstition, while the Khymer viewed the Dwemer's rejection of divine authority as dangerous heresy. Conflicts erupted regularly between the two peoples, skirmishes and raids that kept both groups wary of each other. But then came a common threat. The Nords of Skyrim, expanding their first empire, invaded Morrowind with armies intent on conquest. Faced with this external enemy, the Dwemer and Chima put aside their differences and formed an alliance. In the year 416 of the First Era, they established the First Council, a political union that would govern both peoples. The council was led jointly by two figures, Dumak Dwarf King of the Dwemer and Indoril Nerevar, the Hortator, or war leader of the Chima. The alliance proved incredibly effective. The combined armies of the Dwemer and Chima crushed the Nordic invasion, driving the Nords back to Skyrim and establishing Morrowind's independence. For hundreds of years, the First Council maintained peace between the two peoples. Dumak and Nerevar became close friends, a personal bond that symbolized the alliance between their peoples. But that peace would be shattered by what was discovered beneath Red Mountain. Vorin Dagoth, who would later be known as Dagoth-Ur, was the lord of House Dagoth and one of Nerevar's most trusted advisors. Through means that vary depending on which historical account you believe, Dagoth-Ur discovered that the Dwemer had found the Heart of Lorkhan and that Kagrenak was conducting experiments on it, working toward the activation of the Numidium. He immediately brought this information to Nerevar and the other Chima leaders. The Chima were horrified. From their perspective, the Heart of Lorkhan was a sacred object, intimately connected to the creation of the mortal world. Attempting to harness its power for mortal purposes was blasphemy of the highest order, an act that could anger the gods themselves and bring catastrophe upon all of Morrowind. The Daedric Prince Azura herself reportedly appeared to warn Nerevar about the Dwemer's activities, telling him that they were building a new god under the mountain and that this could not be allowed. Nerevar went to his friend Dumak and asked him about the rumors. He wanted to believe that the reports were false, that the Dwemer weren't really attempting something so dangerous. According to most accounts, Dumak knew nothing about Kagrenak's project, though whether this was genuine ignorance or deliberate denial remains unclear. If the histories are accurate, the chief tonal architect had been working in secret, possibly fearing opposition from within Dwemer society, or perhaps wanting to present his work as a finished achievement once it succeeded. When Nerevar pressed the issue, and guided by Azura's warning, demanded that the Dwemer cease their experiments with the heart, the situation escalated rapidly. Dumak, feeling his honor and the Dwemer's autonomy were being questioned, took offense. Kagrenak himself responded with outrage when confronted about the project, insulted that the Chima would dare to dictate what the Dwemer could or could not study. The Chima leadership, including not just Nerevar but also his closest advisors who would later become the tribunal, issued an ultimatum. The Dwemer must stop their work on the heart and abandon the Numidium project, or face destruction. The threat was not idle. The Chima genuinely believed that the fate of all Morrowind, perhaps all Tamriel, hung in the balance. Dumak refused. Whether he was ignorant of the full scope of Kagrenak's work, or whether he decided to support his people's right to pursue knowledge regardless of the risks, the result was the same. The friendship between Dumak and Nerevar, the alliance that had held for nearly 300 years, shattered. The First Council collapsed. In the year 668 of the First Era, the War of the First Council began. The war was brutal and complex, lasting over 30 years. The accounts that survive contradict each other in significant ways, partly because of the passage of time, and partly because the events may have been affected by what's called a dragon break, a rupture in the normal flow of time that allows multiple contradictory versions of events to simultaneously be true. Some accounts describe the war as a straightforward conflict between the Chima and the Dwemer, armies clashing across Morrowind as each side fought for their vision of the future. Other accounts mention the involvement of external forces, The Nords, still hostile to both elven peoples, may have seen an opportunity to regain their lost territories and invaded once again. Some sources claim that Nords, Orcs, and even Khajiit participated in the conflict, though which side they fought on varies between accounts. One particularly interesting account involves Wulfharth, an ancient Nordic king who had died and been resurrected multiple times throughout history. According to this version, the Nordic tongues, masters of the voice, summoned Shor, the Nordic name for Lorkhan, who in turn summoned Wulfharth to lead Nordic forces. They came to Red Mountain to reclaim what the Nords considered the Heart of Shor, believing it rightfully belonged to them. There's also confusion about House Dagoth's role. Most accounts say they fought alongside the Chimer under Nerevar, but some sources suggest that Dagoth betrayed the Chimer and sided with the Dwemer, or that he led a separate faction allied with Wulfharth's Nords. These contradictions make it difficult to piece together exactly what happened, but one thing is certain. The war culminated in a massive battle at Red Mountain in the year 700 of the First Era. This battle would change everything. The Battle of Red Mountain and the Vanishing. The Battle of Red Mountain represents the climactic moment of the War of the First Council and the instant when the Dwemer disappeared from Tamriel. What exactly happened during this battle remains one of history's most debated questions, with accounts varying so wildly that some scholars believe multiple versions of events occurred simultaneously. What all sources agree on is that the battle focused on Red Mountain itself, and specifically on the chamber deep within where the Heart of Lorkhan was kept. Nerevar's strategy, according to most accounts, was to draw the bulk of the Dwemer forces away from Red Mountain, while he and his closest advisors, Vivec, Almalexia, and Sothasil, who would later become known as the Tribunal, infiltrated the Heart Chamber along with Dagoth The chamber was defended by Dumak and Kagrenak themselves, a last stand to protect the Dwemer's ultimate achievement. What followed has been described in various, often contradictory ways, but all accounts agree it involved both physical combat and something far more significant, the activation or attempted activation of the Numidium using Kagrenak's tools on the Heart of Lorkhan. According to Vivek's later writings, Kagrenak actually succeeded in activating the Numidium during the battle. If his account is to be believed, the massive brass construct awakened and began operating with devastating effect. It burned the Chimer armies surrounding it, its very presence warping reality in ways that caused massive destruction. Vivek claims the blast of power when it activated was so intense that it carved out the inner sea, flooding a vast area and permanently reshaping the geography of Vardenfell. He further asserts that only through the intervention of the Tribunal was the Numidium defeated and the Dwemer removed from the world. However, Vivek's reliability as a narrator has long been questioned by scholars, given his tendency toward mythologizing and his personal stake in the events. But other accounts tell different stories. Some say that when the Chimer forces broke into the Heart Chamber, they found Kagrenak in the process of using his tools on the heart. They fought, and in the chaos of combat, something went catastrophically wrong with Kagrenak's calculations or timing. The tools struck the heart with incorrect tones, or the ritual was interrupted at a crucial moment, and the result was not the controlled apotheosis that Kagrenak had planned, but something entirely different. The most dramatic version of events involves Wulfharth obtaining the heart himself during the battle. According to this account, the ancient Nordic king stood before the heart, attempting to acclimate to its power when he was attacked by Nerevar and his companions. Dumak wielded Sunda, Alandrosul wore Wraithguard in the form of a chest plate, and Nerevar carried Keening. In the battle that followed, Wulfharth blinded Alandrosul with a shout of the voice and killed Dumak, but Nerevar managed to strike a surprise blow with Keening, killing Wulfharth and cutting out his heart. But regardless of the exact sequence of events, all accounts agree on the result. Every single Dwemer on Tamriel vanished in the same instant. Not just those at Red Mountain, not just those in combat. Every Dwemer in every city, every workshop, every mine, every remote outpost across the continent. Simultaneously, instantly, they cease to exist as physical beings in the mortal world. Later explorations of Dwemer ruins would find evidence of how sudden this disappearance was. In Bams Amshen, a ruin beneath the city of Mournhold that hadn't been discovered or disturbed since the disappearance, explorers found piles of ash next to Dwemer clothing, weapons, and armor. The ashes were on chairs where people had been sitting, in beds where they had been sleeping, on workbenches where they had been crafting. It appears that the Dwemer didn't physically leave their locations. Rather, their bodies were reduced to ash where they stood, as if they had been incinerated from within, though their possessions remained untouched. This pattern was found throughout Dwemer ruins, whenever areas were discovered that had been sealed since the First Era. Empty armor, cold forges, dinner tables set for meals that would never be eaten, all covered in a fine layer of ash. But not quite every Dwemer vanished. Yagrum Bagarn, a master crafter who had been away from Tamriel entirely, travelling in what he called an outer realm, returned to find his entire people gone. For over 500 years, he searched the outer realms and explored Mundus, seeking any trace of his people. He found nothing. No Dwemer spirits in any afterlife he could access. No trace of them in any of the planes of oblivion he could reach. No evidence of what had happened or where they might have gone. Eventually, he contracted Corporus, a horrible disease, which ended his searching and left him the last living Dwemer, preserved indefinitely by the very affliction that trapped him in a bloated, twisted body. Ghost-like entities have also been encountered in Dwemer ruins. These Dwemer spectres are aggressive revenants, spirits that attack intruders with mindless hostility. They don't seem to have any memory or consciousness of who they were, just angry remnants that haunt the places where they died. Their existence suggests that something did happen to Dwemer souls, but whatever that something was, it didn't allow them to move on to any normal afterlife. The immediate aftermath of the battle was chaotic. King Dumak was dead, killed either by Wolfhearth or in the defense of the Heart Chamber, depending on which account one believes. Nerevar himself died, either from wounds sustained in the battle or, according to some more sinister accounts, murdered by his own advisors after the battle concluded. House Dagoth was destroyed or decimated, with most sources claiming it was exterminated entirely, though some members may have been absorbed into other great houses. The Tribunal, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil recovered Kagranak's tools from the Heart Chamber. What happened next is a matter of some debate. Some sources suggest they used the tools on the Heart of Lorkhan immediately after the battle, tapping into its divine power and transforming themselves into living gods. Other accounts indicate this apotheosis occurred years later. Either way, their use of the heart succeeded where Kagranak's had apparently failed, though it came at a cost. According to the dominant narrative, Azura cursed them for their blasphemy, transforming the golden-skinned Chimer into the grey-skinned, red-eyed Dunmer as punishment for violating the heart. Some versions place this curse immediately after Nerevar's death, others after the Tribunal's use of the tools. The First Council was reformed as the Grand Council, now consisting only of the surviving great houses of the Dunmer. The Dwemer were gone, their cities abandoned, their great project left incomplete. Red Mountain erupted in a catastrophic event that the Nords called the Year of Winter in summer, and others called Sun's Death, spewing ash across the region and reshaping the landscape. And in the silence that followed, one question echoed through every Dwemer ruin and in the mind of every scholar who studied what happened. Why? Why did the Dwemer disappear? What exactly happened when Kagranak used his tools on the heart? Where did they go, or did they go anywhere at all? Theories of disappearance. For over 3,000 years, scholars, mages, and adventurers have proposed theories about what happened to the Dwemer. None of these theories can be proven definitively, but each has evidence and reasoning to support it. Let's examine the major hypotheses about the fate of the Deep Folk. The first and perhaps most widely accepted theory is what we might call the Numidium binding theory. This hypothesis suggests that Kagranak's ritual succeeded, but not in the way he intended. When he used his tools on the Heart of Lorkhan, the theory proposes, he bound the souls or consciousness of all Dwemer to the Numidium itself, transforming them into a collective oversoul that powers and comprises the brass god. This interpretation draws support from several pieces of evidence. First, the Numidium did function after the Dwemer disappeared. When Tiber Septim later acquired it and had his battle mage Zurin Arctus create a replacement power source, the Mantella, the construct operated with devastating effectiveness. Observers noted it wasn't just a machine following programmed instructions, but displayed what seemed like will and purpose, as if guided by intelligence rather than mere mechanism. Second, when Dagoth attempted to build his own version of the Numidium, called Akulakhan, Dwemer ghosts suddenly began appearing in the ruins of Morrowind with greater frequency than before. These spectres hadn't been commonly seen prior to this period. The timing suggests a possible connection between the construction of a new god construct powered by the heart and the manifestation of Dwemer spiritual remnants. Based on this pattern, one might infer that the Dwemer souls are indeed bound to the power of the heart, and can manifest when that power is being actively channeled into a Numidium-like construct. Third, there's Arniel Gane's experiment. In the Fourth Era, this researcher at the College of Winterhold obtained keening, one of Kagranak's tools, and attempted to recreate the circumstances of the Dwemer's disappearance. He created a warped soul gem to serve as a miniature version of the Heart of Lorkhan and struck it with keening while channeling the appropriate tonal frequencies. The result? Arniel vanished instantly, just like the Dwemer. But he didn't die in any conventional sense. Instead, his shade, his spiritual essence, became bound to the person who helped him with the experiment. That person could summon Arniel's shade at will, and the shade would appear, seemingly unaware that it had died or changed state, and would wander the College of Winterhold between summonings. If we accept that Arniel's experiment truly recreated what happened to the Dwemer, which is itself an assumption we must make carefully, then it would suggest they were transformed into spiritual entities bound to something. Perhaps they're bound to each other in a vast collective consciousness, or to the Numidium, or to the heart itself. Their physical bodies were destroyed, reduced to ash, but their souls or consciousness would have persisted in an altered state. Of course, Arniel's experiment involved a much smaller scale and only one person, so extrapolating to an entire race requires caution. The second major theory is the zero-sum theory, and it's considerably more metaphysical and abstract. To understand this theory, we need to delve into some concepts drawn from the more esoteric corners of Elder Scrolls philosophy. According to certain mystical traditions, referenced in various in-game texts, all of existence might be understood as a dream being dreamed by an entity, sometimes called the Godhead or the Amaranth. Within this framework, every soul, every being, everything that exists could be seen as a construct within this dream. Those who grasp this truth face a crucial moment. If they can accept this knowledge while simultaneously asserting their own individual identity and importance, they might achieve something called CHIM, a state of enlightened existence where they transcend normal limitations while remaining part of reality. However, according to this philosophical model, if someone realizes they're part of a dream, but cannot maintain their sense of self in the face of that knowledge, they undergo what's called zero-sum. They would cease to exist, not just in the present, but retroactively, erased from the dream entirely as if they had never been. The world would adjust to their absence, filling in the gaps they left behind. The zero-sum theory suggests that when Kagrenak activated his ritual, every Dwemer simultaneously gained insight into the nature of their reality. They saw through what some might call the illusion of existence to a deeper truth beneath. The hypothesis goes that the Dwemer's philosophy, their rejection of mysticism, and their reliance on pure reason may have made it impossible for them to maintain individual identity in the face of this cosmic revelation. Unable to achieve CHIM, they instead underwent collective zero-sum and were erased from existence. The problem with this theory is that if the Dwemer were truly zero-summed, there should be no evidence of them left behind. Their ruins, their machines, their influence on history, all of it should have vanished as if it never existed. The fact that Dwemer ruins still exist, that their technology still functions, that Yagrum Bagarn remembers them, suggests that they weren't completely erased from reality. Unless zero-sum works differently than we understand, or unless there's something about the Dwemer's collective nature that allowed their works to persist even as their individuals vanished, this theory has some significant holes. A third theory is the outer realm displacement theory. Yagrum Bagarn himself suggested that Kagrenak's interference with the heart caused some kind of displacement, sending all Dwemer to an outer realm, a plane of existence beyond Mundus and possibly beyond even the realms of oblivion. Yagrum survived only because he was already in an outer realm when the displacement occurred, meaning he was outside the effect's range. This theory would explain why Yagrum found no trace of his people, despite extensive searching. If they were displaced to a realm he couldn't reach or couldn't find, they might still exist somewhere, changed perhaps, but not destroyed. Some variations of this theory propose the outer realm in question might be the soul cairn, a plane associated with soul gems and necromancy, which would connect to the idea that the heart functioned as a massive soul gem during Kagrenak's ritual. However, this is pure speculation, as no evidence directly links the disappearance to the soul cairn. The outer realm theory has the advantage of being testable in principle. If the Dwemer exists somewhere, they might eventually be found, or might even find a way to return. However, after 3,000 years with no contact, this seems increasingly unlikely. Either they're in a realm so remote that even entities like the Daedric princes can't reach it, which raises questions about what kind of place could be so inaccessible, or something about their displacement prevents them from returning, or even being detected. A fourth theory, less commonly discussed but with some support among religious scholars, is the divine punishment theory. This hypothesis proposes that the gods, angered by the Dwemer's hubris and their attempt to steal divine power, simply wiped them out. Perhaps not the Aedra, who seem generally unable or unwilling to intervene so directly in mortal affairs, but Azura, the Daedric prince who was patron to the Chimera, might have had both motive and means to eliminate the Dwemer when they profaned Lorkhan's heart. Proponents of this theory point out that Azura certainly had demonstrated the power to curse an entire race, as shown when she transformed all the Chimera into Dunmer. If she could accomplish that, the reasoning goes, perhaps she could also have destroyed the Dwemer entirely. The timing would fit, as the disappearance occurred at the moment when the Chimera's Daedric patron was most directly concerned with events at Red Mountain. However, critics of this theory note that it doesn't explain why only the Dwemer on Mundus vanished, leaving Yagrum Bagarn alive in an outer realm, unless we assume divine power has limited range, or unless Azura simply didn't know about, or couldn't reach Dwemer who were in other planes. Most scholars find this explanation too simple, and note the lack of any claim of responsibility from Azura herself. There are other, more exotic theories. Some suggest the Dwemer successfully achieved apotheosis, but in doing so, transcended physical existence entirely, becoming something beyond mortal comprehension. Others propose that they travelled through time, either to the far future or to the distant past, perhaps even to the Dawn era, before linear time existed. Still others believe they somehow merged with the Earth itself, becoming part of the fabric of Nirn at a fundamental level. What makes this mystery so frustrating is that we have one person who actually knew the Dwemer, who worked with them and understood their technology, and even Yagrum Bagarn doesn't know what happened. He's spent centuries trying to figure it out, analysing every bit of information he can find, and he's concluded that Kagranak's interference with the heart caused the disappearance. But even he can't explain the exact mechanism or say where his people went. The truth may be that the Dwemer's disappearance involved something so far outside normal understanding that it cannot be adequately explained in mortal terms. They were manipulating the heart of a dead god, using tools designed to alter fundamental reality through tonal architecture. The forces they were dealing with existed at levels where the normal rules of existence might not apply. Whatever happened when Kagranak struck, that heart might have been something unique in all of history, a singular event that cannot be replicated or fully comprehended. The evidence that remains. While we may never know exactly what happened to the Dwemer, we're not entirely without evidence. Over the 3 millennia since their disappearance, various clues have been uncovered that shed light on the mystery, even if they don't fully solve it. The most obvious evidence is the state of the ruins themselves. Dwemer cities were abandoned mid-activity. Food was left on tables. Tools were left on workbenches. Forges still contained metal that had been in the process of being worked. Everything suggests that whatever happened came without warning and struck so quickly that the Dwemer had no time to prepare or react. This rules out theories of gradual departure or advanced planning. Whatever Kagranak did, either he didn't warn his people what was about to happen, or it happened faster than anyone expected. The ash piles found in sealed portions of ruins like Bam's Amshund are particularly telling. They suggest that Dwemer bodies didn't just vanish, they were physically destroyed, reduced to dust in an instant. But this destruction was selective, targeting only Dwemer flesh while leaving everything else untouched. Clothing, armor, weapons, tools, all remained perfectly intact. Whatever force did this could discriminate between Dwemer biology and everything else with perfect precision, which suggests incredible sophistication or specificity in the effect. Yagrum Bagarn himself is perhaps our most valuable source of evidence, though he poses questions as much as he answers them. He is unquestionably Dwemer, physically and in his memories and knowledge. Yet he survived because he was elsewhere when the disappearance occurred. This tells us several important things. First, the effect had limited range. It didn't affect Dwemer, who were outside of Mundus at the time. Second, Kagranak either didn't intend to affect all Dwemer everywhere in all planes, or his rituals simply couldn't reach beyond the mortal plane. Third, being Dwemer alone wasn't enough to be caught in the effect. You had to be in the right place at the right time. Yagrum's subsequent inability to find any trace of his people, despite centuries of searching, suggests they didn't go to any of the conventional afterlives or planes of existence that he could access. Either they went somewhere he couldn't reach, or they ceased to exist in ways that left no trace for him to find. His testimony is also valuable because he confirms that the Egg of Time, a text that argued it was safe to interrupt a link to a divine power source, was incorrect. The disappearance proved that interfering with the heart had catastrophic consequences. The appearance of Dwemer ghosts in the Third Era is another piece of evidence, though interpreting it is difficult. These spirits are aggressive and mindless, attacking anyone who enters their ruins. They don't seem to have memories or personality, just anger and hostility. This could suggest that Dwemer souls were damaged or fragmented by whatever happened to them. Alternatively, it might mean that these ghosts are not actually the souls of individual Dwemer, but rather some kind of spiritual residue, echoes of the race left behind in places where they spent their lives. The timing of when these ghosts became more commonly reported is significant. They appeared with greater frequency during the period when Dagoth Ur was working on Lorkhan, his version of the Numidium. If the Dwemer souls are bound to the power of the heart or to the concept of the Numidium, as some theories suggest, then activating that power or building a new god construct might allow fragments of those souls to manifest temporarily. When the Nerevarine destroyed Lorkhan and severed the connection to the heart, reports of Dwemer ghosts became less common again, which lends some support to this interpretation, though we should note this pattern isn't definitively proven. Arniel Gane's experiment in the Fourth Era is probably the closest thing we have to a recreation of the Dwemer's disappearance, and it provides some of our best evidence about what might have happened. Arniel vanished instantly when he used keening on his warped soul gem. But he didn't die in any conventional sense. His shade could be summoned and would appear, fighting on behalf of whoever summoned him, but seeming unaware of his changed state. Between summonings, his shade wandered the College of Winterhold, suggesting some vestige of his former habits, and preferences remained even in his transformed state. If we extrapolate from Arniel's fate to the Dwemer, it suggests they might still exist in some form, transformed into spiritual entities, but retaining something of who they were. Perhaps they're all bound together. Thousands of individual consciousness merged into a collective that powered or became the Numidium. Perhaps they're scattered across some plane we cannot reach, aware of their existence but unable to return to Mundus or communicate with it. The continued functionality of Dwemer technology is itself a piece of evidence. The animunculi still operate, the lights still glow, the traps still trigger, all without any living maintenance. This suggests that something of the Dwemer persists in their creations, perhaps not consciousness, but some fundamental essence that keeps their tonal architecture functioning. The way animunculi seem linked to their place of origin, losing power if taken too far from Dwemer ruins, hints at a connection between the machines and something that exists in or around those locations. Could this be residual Dwemer presence, their spirits or energy somehow woven into the very structures they built? There's also the matter of how Dwemer metal doesn't age. 3,000 years have passed, yet Dwemer weapons and armor found in ruins show no signs of rust or decay. They're as strong and functional as the day they were forged. Normal metal would have degraded significantly over such a period, even in the dry, protected environment of sealed ruins. The fact that Dwemer metal remains pristine suggests it's not entirely bound by normal physical laws. Whether this durability was achieved through tonal architecture applied during the forging process, some unknown alloy composition, or other means remains unknown. But it clearly represents a metallurgical achievement that has never been replicated. All of this evidence paints a picture of a catastrophic event that affected all Dwemer on Mundus simultaneously, destroying their physical bodies, but possibly preserving them in some altered state. The precision of the effect, its instantaneous nature, and its connection to Kagranak's work with the heart all point to this being the result of a planned ritual, not an accident or external intervention. Kagranak intended to do something momentous with the Heart of Lorkhan and the Numidium. Whatever he did, it worked, but perhaps not in the way he expected or hoped. Legacy and mystery. The Dwemer's disappearance left a void in Tamriel that has never been filled. They were unique, a race that approached existence from a perspective no other people shared, and their loss represents a permanent diminishment of the continent's cultural and intellectual diversity. But perhaps more than that, their vanishing serves as a perpetual reminder of the dangers inherent in reaching beyond mortal limits, in attempting to grasp powers meant for gods alone. Their technological legacy remains tangible and valuable. Every piece of Dwemer scrap metal that can be salvaged from ruins is worth significant gold, not just for its intrinsic value, but because it can be melted down and reforged into equipment of exceptional quality. Scholars and mages study Dwemer artifacts, trying to understand their principles and perhaps unlock secrets that could advance modern magical and technological understanding. The Mages Guild and the College of Winterhold both maintain departments dedicated to Dwemer research. But all of this study has barely scratched the surface of what the Dwemer knew. We can use their machines, but we don't truly understand how they work. We can read their writing, but the deeper texts on tonal architecture remain largely incomprehensible. We can explore their cities, but the full scope of their knowledge died with them. It's as if a civilization from thousands of years in humanity's future had suddenly vanished, leaving their technology behind for us to puzzle over. We can see that it works. We can even use some of it, but the underlying principles remain frustratingly out of reach. The Numidium itself had a strange afterlife that demonstrates both the power of Dwemer technology and the dangers of using it without full understanding. Centuries after the Battle of Red Mountain, Tiber Septim acquired the deactivated construct as part of his treaty with the Tribunal. His battle mage Zurin Arctus studied Dwemer texts and created a replacement for the Heart of Lorkhan, a device called the Mantella that served as a power source by trapping a powerful soul within it. When activated, the Numidium proved devastatingly effective, allowing Tiber Septim to complete his conquest of Tamriel by subjugating even the Altmer of the Somerset Isles. According to some accounts, though these are debated by scholars, the siege of Alinor, the capital of Somerset, reportedly lasted only an hour, yet due to the reality warping properties of the Numidium, that hour was stretched across time. In this version of events, the construct fought Altmeri mages called mirror logicians throughout all points in history simultaneously. Whether this account is literally true or represents a mythologized understanding of traumatic events, the Altmer's experience with the Numidium would color their attitude toward the Empire for centuries to come. Eventually, the Numidium was destroyed, or at least rendered inoperable, though the exact circumstances vary by account. But even broken, it continued to exert influence. When Dagoth Ur, who had survived the Battle of Red Mountain and bound himself to the Heart of Lorkhan through his own ritual, began constructing Akalakhan, a second Numidium, the very attempt seemed to awaken something. The Dwemer ghosts appeared. The power of the heart began corrupting the land with the blight. It was as if the construction of a new brass god was calling to the old Dwemer, trying to complete what they had started millennia ago. The Nerevarine, believed to be the reincarnation of Indoril Nereva, eventually put an end to Dagoth Ur's plan. Using Kagranak's tools, the prophesied hero destroyed the Heart of Lorkhan itself, severing its connection to Mundus and ending its influence forever. With the heart destroyed, no more Numidiums could be built. The Tribunal lost their divine power, and the threat of another Dwemer-related catastrophe seemed to end. Yet the mystery persists. Students at the College of Winterhold still study what little they can about Dwemer methods. Adventurers still delve into ruins seeking treasures and knowledge. Scholars still debate what happened that day at Red Mountain. The Dwemer have been gone for 3,000 years, but they remain present in Tamriel's consciousness, a cautionary tale and an unsolved mystery that captures the imagination of each new generation. There's something deeply compelling about the Dwemer's story. Perhaps it's the tragedy of it, an entire civilization reaching for ultimate achievement only to pay the ultimate price. Perhaps it's the mystery, that fundamental uncertainty about what actually happened and where they went. Perhaps it's the evidence they left behind, these perfect machines still functioning after millennia, standing as testament to both their genius and their loss. Or perhaps what makes the Dwemer so fascinating is what they represent as a concept. They were the rationalists, the skeptics, the ones who looked at the gods and refused to bow. They saw divinity not as something to worship, but as something to understand, analyze, and potentially achieve through their own efforts. They rejected faith in favor of reason, tradition in favor of innovation, acceptance in favor of transformation. In many ways, they were right. They proved that mortal beings could tap into divine power, that godhood wasn't beyond reach for those with sufficient knowledge and will. The tribunal succeeded where the Dwemer failed, using the same heart and possibly similar methods to achieve apotheosis. The difference was that the tribunal knew what they were doing, or at least had guidance from Azura and others. Kagranak was working largely blind, developing his theories without the benefit of examples or divine instruction. He was attempting something unprecedented, and in doing so, he rolled the dice for his entire people. Did they succeed? Are the Dwemer now something greater than they were? Their consciousness merged into a divine oversoul that powered a god of brass? Or did they fail catastrophically, erased from existence, or trapped in some outer darkness from which there is no return? We don't know. We may never know. And perhaps that's fitting. The Dwemer always were secretive, the deep ones keeping their knowledge close. In disappearing, they left behind the ultimate secret, a mystery that continues to tantalize and frustrate 3 millennia later. Their ruins stand as monuments to ambition and to caution. Walk through Dwemer halls, and you can still hear the hiss of steam through ancient pipes, still see the glow of lights that have burned for thousands of years, still face the guardians they created to protect their cities. The Dwemer are gone, but their presence remains, a ghost of civilization that achieved heights other races can barely imagine, and paid a price that we can only begin to comprehend. Conclusion. So what really happened to the Dwemer? After examining all the evidence, all the theories, all the clues they left behind, we find ourselves facing the same uncertainty that has frustrated scholars for 3,000 years. We know that Kagranak used his tools on the Heart of Lorkhan. We know that when he did, every Dwemer on Mundus vanished simultaneously, their bodies reduced to ash. We know that they weren't simply killed in the conventional sense because Yagrum Bagarn survived by being absent, and because Dwemer ghosts continue to appear. We know that something of them may have been bound into the Numidium, or into some state that Arniel Gane's experiment hinted at. But the exact mechanism, the precise nature of what happened, remains uncertain. Did Kagranak achieve his goal of elevating his people to a higher state of existence, but at the cost of their physical forms and individual identities? Did he fail catastrophically, causing them to be erased from reality or trapped in some hellish outer realm? Did they become something entirely other, something so far beyond mortal understanding that we lack even the concepts to describe it? Based on the available evidence, the most plausible scenario seems to be that Kagranak's ritual succeeded in binding the Dwemer to the Numidium, transforming them from individual physical beings into a collective spiritual entity that served as the divine spark powering their brass god. This interpretation accounts for their physical disappearance, the ash left behind, the survival of Yagrum who was outside the effect's range, and the later functioning of the Numidium. If this understanding is correct, it would mean that in a sense, the Dwemer achieved their goal. They transcended mortality and became part of something divine, but they did so at the cost of everything that made them individuals, merged into an oversoul that could only exist as the animating force of a mechanical deity. If this understanding is correct, it would mean that in a sense the Dwemer achieved their goal. They transcended mortality and became part of something divine, but they did so at the cost of everything that made them individuals, merged into an oversoul that could only exist as the animating force of a mechanical deity. The irony is profound. They rejected the gods and sought to become gods themselves, and in achieving this, they demonstrated both the possibility and the terrible cost of such transcendence. The tribunal later proved it could be done differently, that individuals could tap the heart's power, and become gods while retaining their separate identities. But the tribunal had advantages Kagrenac lacked: time to prepare, possible guidance from Azura before her curse, and perhaps most importantly, they acted after witnessing what happened to the Dwemer. They learned from Kagrenac's approach, whether it was a mistake or an intentional sacrifice, and adjusted their own methods accordingly. The difference in outcomes suggests that the specific manner in which one manipulates the heart's power matters enormously. The mystery of the Dwemer continues to resonate because it touches on fundamental questions about ambition, knowledge, and the price of progress. How far should mortals reach? What knowledge is too dangerous to pursue? Is there a point where understanding crosses into hubris, where achievement becomes transgression? The Dwemer pushed beyond every boundary, rejected every limit, and in doing so, they either found transcendence or destruction, that we cannot say which speaks to the profundity of what they attempted. Their legacy lives on in their ruins, in their still functioning machines, in the questions they raise. Every adventurer who explores a Dwemer city, every scholar who studies their texts, every mage who examines their enchantments is touching something that reaches beyond normal mortal experience. The Deep Ones may be gone, but what they built and what they attempted ensures they will never be forgotten. Perhaps the most appropriate epitaph for the Dwemer comes from Yagrum Bagarn, the last of his kind, who after centuries of searching could only conclude that his people had disappeared due to Kagrenac's work with the heart, that they had reached for something immense and been transformed by it. In his simple acknowledgement that he doesn't know what happened to them, there's a humility that the Dwemer themselves never showed, an acceptance of mystery that they would have rejected, and maybe that's the final lesson of their disappearance. Some questions remain unanswered, not because we lack intelligence or dedication, but because the answers exist in realms beyond mortal reach. The Dwemer vanished in the year 700 of the First Era, and in the over 3,000 years since, no one has solved the mystery of where they went or what they became. They remain what they always were, the Deep Ones, keeping their secrets, challenging the limits of knowledge, serving as both inspiration and warning to all who would follow where they led. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Elder Scrolls' greatest mysteries, please hit that like button and subscribe to Tired Lore for more relaxing explorations of gaming's most fascinating stories. Until next time, sleep well, dream of lost civilizations, and remember, some knowledge, once grasped, changes us in ways we cannot anticipate, and some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again.